One day, my mother-in-law's chronic illness worsened and she had to be hospitalized. The responsibility fell on my husband, John, and me to take care of her. John has 2 older brothers, but they left her college in the city, landed jobs there as well, married city girls they met, and built their homes in the city. Therefore, they seldom returning to our small town. The last time we saw them was at the 3-year memorial service for their father, my father-in-law. It was only the 2 brothers who came, even for the 3-year memorial service. Their wives and children, who had been well taken care of by my mother-in-law, were conspicuously absent. They might think it's none of their business since their husbands came, but the brothers' wives told me, "It's a hassle, so we'd rather keep it to family only. The travel costs are already in the hundreds of dollars." After discussing with my mother-in-law, we decided to hold the 7-year memorial service just between us and her. But then her illness took a turn for the worse and she had to be hospitalized again. Since we have a small child at home, we can't bring them to the hospital, so they're staying with my parents. My mother-in-law feels guilty about burdening my parents, but there's really nothing we can do about it. John helps out as much as he can, visiting after work to bring laundry home or help clean her up. We've let the brothers know about the hospitalization, but they haven't visited or sent any gifts. Despite this, the wives of the brothers are still complaining about not receiving the seasonal premium fruits that my mother-in-law sends them every year. "You're aware that my mother-in-law is in the hospital, right?" I said. To which they replied, "You should be more thoughtful and send something over." The fruits she sends are luxury items that we rarely get to eat ourselves, even in our hometown. The only time we can enjoy them is when we visit my parents. When I told them we are not well enough to send a box worth of hundreds of dollars, they sighed and said, "This is the only time being from a small town is worth anything." It was really infuriating. We ignored the message they left on my in-laws' answering machine, but then they called our house. They were complaining about not being able to share with their friends because they hadn't received their share. My mother-in-law reassures us that she'll pay us back for what we spent on her care, but we've been covering some of the smaller expenses out of pocket. When my father-in-law passed away, all of his estate, which isn't worth much more than a couple $1,000s, even if we sold the house and land, was inherited by my mother-in-law for her retirement. She's not impoverished since she had a bit of pension, but she's not well off either. Despite this, she's been sending boxes of products worth hundreds of dollars from local farmers to both of her sons' families every year. It's something the locals rarely get to taste since it's not sold in markets, only at farmers markets. It's expensive, and for us, a family struggling with kids, we can only get a small share from my parents or my mother-in-law. On top of this, there have been no signs of gratitude or return gifts from the brothers' families. My mother-in-law once complained, "They don't even call to let me know they received the boxes." When John told his brothers about her hospitalization, their reaction was just bland, "Oh really?" and didn't say anything about visiting. Apparently, my mother-in-law was hoping her sons would visit, so I felt bad for her. A few days passed, and things went downhill. Last night, my mother-in-law called from the hospital. She wanted me to send some luxury fruit on behalf of her sons. Frustrated that she couldn't get anywhere with me, it seems she directly called the hospital where my mother-in-law was. Naturally, the patient herself couldn't answer, so a nurse brought a note with a message. It turned out it was the eldest son's wife who made the call. The note had wrote something like, "The second son's wife is struggling because nothing has been sent, so please hurry up." My husband John was the one who answered my mother-in-law's call, and he finally lost his temper. He told her, "If you're going to go out of your way for both brothers' family, we're stepping back. We'll ensure complete nursing care and laundry services are taken care of. Since we served as guarantors, we're done here, right? The rest is up to your sons." Apparently, he also planned to shout at his brothers over the phone, "Buy your own fruit online." I had a suspicion that my mother-in-law was favoring her accomplished sons, so there was something refreshing about the situation. From that day on, John strongly advised me not to go to the hospital, so I decided not to. Since my mother-in-law's condition is improving and her life is not in danger, I plan to do as she says. Since John chose to stay in our hometown, we took care of my father-in-law during his illness and after his death. At that time, my mother-in-law was also going to the hospital, so we did what was asked of us, like visiting him. However, after my father-in-law's death, I was the only one who was able to take actions on the weekdays, running around and dealing with all the paperwork, carrying my baby on the back. At that time, I thought it couldn't be helped since my mother-in-law didn't have a driver's license. Yet, I never received any gratitude, let alone thank you from my sister-in-laws. Today, my mother-in-law called and said, "Have you sent it? If you don't hurry, the good ones will be gone. And why aren't you coming to the hospital today? Did someone get a fever? You can leave them at your parents' house and come here." I felt like I had woken up from a long dream. So I told my mother-in-law that John said we didn't need to take care of her anymore, that we wouldn't be able to afford the premium fruit because we're always on a tight budget. Then she grumbled over the phone that I lacked thoughtfulness for a woman. that I should have sent something even if not asked to, that I was low level because I only graduated high school, that we should act humbly towards her house because my sister-in-law graduated from prestigious universities. I'm a high school graduate with limited capabilities, so I'll excuse myself from taking care of you, Mother. I found myself retorting spontaneously. My heart was pounding for a while, but when I did report to John after he returned home, he said, "That's fine, don't go to the hospital again." My husband John apparently told his brothers, "The wives have been asking for premium fruits for Mom, but she's in the hospital and I have no plans to send her any. If you guys want her to have them so badly, bring them when you visit her." When his brothers responded that they didn't have time and that the travel would be expensive, he replied, "It's unfair for just my wife and I to care for Mom. We've been doing it so far, now it's your turn, guys." And with that, he ended the call. Looks like there's a conflict brewing, but there's nothing I can do. Probably because John only has a high school diploma, our family seems to be looked down upon. His brother-in-law and their wives all graduated from famous city colleges, presumably in New York. I think my mother-in-law takes great pride in that. I never minded taking care of the in-laws in the past, and I have plenty of friends who, despite their usual conflicts, step up when someone falls ill. I thought that's what you do. John standing his ground felt good, but I was startled because we live in a small town surrounded by relatives. Before my mother-in-law could complain to them, I decided to pay a visit to my uncle, who had acted as our matchmaker. My uncle knew that we were the only ones taking care of my in-laws and promised to explain the situation to the rest of the family so that my mother-in-law wouldn't badmouth us. He just asked us to accompany her when she gets discharged from the hospital. Since we don't know when she'll be discharged, if it's on a day off, John will go, and if it's a weekday, I'll go with my uncle. He also promised to question my mother-in-law on why she treats her children differently. Then just recently, my mother-in-law's sister, my aunt, called to complain. Apparently, since we've given up caring for my mother-in-law, she has summoned my aunt to the hospital. She said her children should look after her, so when she asked to call her sons, it turned out she had already done so. But the wives of her sons told her, "We're too far away and can't come. We're also tight on money because of our children's education expenses," and hung up on her. I had a headache. Since it was a weekday and John rarely gets days off, I thought I'd have to go, but considering what was said, I didn't want to. Honestly, I didn't want to see my mother-in-law's face anymore. I figured when she's discharged, she'd ask us to come help, and it felt really depressing. Even if John had turned her down, the family around us didn't seem to approve. My aunt is taking care of her bedridden mother-in-law, and my mother-in-law usually says she's doing a tough job. I thought calling my aunt was a form of harassment against us. I wonder why those of us who stayed in the local town end up drawing the short straw. I ended up feeling envious of the luxury lives of my brother-in-law's wives, who is both out of local town. I discussed it with John when he got home, and he called his eldest brother. They talked for a while, and apparently other relatives besides my uncle and aunt had called the eldest brother's place. So the two brothers are going to come back for the weekend to discuss how to take care of their mother in the future. At the discussion, along with the two brothers, John and I, uncle, aunt, and the other relatives were going to talk. I've decided to make a detailed list of the money I've lent to my mother-in-law that hasn't been returned and the things I've done for her. I presented this to the family meeting, which included my mother-in-law, who was temporarily discharged from the hospital. During the discussion, my mother-in-law insisted that her eldest son, who lives in a single-family home and graduated from a good university in the city, should take care of her. In the end, he reluctantly agreed to take her in. After her discharge from the hospital, my mother-in-law moved to the city with her hospital referral letter and my late father-in-law's memorial tablet. As for the remaining family home, my uncles and aunts suggested that my husband should keep it, considering he couldn't go to college. However, we declined as we didn't need it and moved into an apartment on my family's side. We have not informed our addresses or contact information to my mother-in-law or my brother-in-law. John and I also decided to change our mobile numbers, which had been in use for 3 years, and remove our landline phone, effectively cutting ties. We thought that this would be the end of it, but recently we received a phone call from my uncle that my mother-in-law had returned to the family home. My mother relayed the message to us. Apparently, the eldest brother's wife had been very cold to my mother-in-law because the eldest brother had made the decision to take her in without consulting his wife. She had even been told to get her own meals by herself, even if it was right after being discharged from the hospital. After a month, she couldn't take it anymore and asked her second son for help, but he also declined since his wife had already been cautious about the situation from the start. That's why she returned to her original family home. Just because my uncle contacted us doesn't mean we plan to help my mother-in-law. During our discussion, John was hurt when my mother-in-law told him, "You were a poor student and had no choice but to stay here in the small town. You're my disappointing third son." She even said she was disappointed that I, whom John met and married at his job after graduating from his vocational school, only had a high school education. We no longer feel the need to appease my mother-in-law after such harsh words. I had been wary of the situation from the start, given the way my sister-in-law had acted, and that's why I didn't take my aunt and uncle's advice to move into the family home. But I never thought she'd return in such a short amount of time, especially after the eldest brother boasted, "If you hate taking care of mom so much, I'll let my wife do it." I expected her to at least stay longer. In our discussion, I had a list of daily necessities that my mother-in-law had used and the money I had spent on her, which I had been keeping in the household budget book. I also wrote down the things I did for the family home, like going to the city hall to get a burial permit after my father-in-law's funeral, dealing with pension procedures, and the transportation costs for taking my mother-in-law to the hospital. I made copies and handed them over to John's 2 older brothers, my uncle, and my aunt. John's 2 older brothers said it was only natural because they're her children, but my uncle and aunt said it was unfair for John alone to bear the burden. They told my mother-in-law to return the money that we had fronted. My mother-in-law glared at me angrily and threw some money at John from her wallet while saying, "You've been influenced by your wife." Even my uncle seemed to lose his patience with the situation. He stood up and slapped my mother-in-law. In the end, she dismissively spat out, "I don't need a child like this," to her. It seems that was when my husband John was able to make the decision to cut ties. Here's a funny side note, the money that my mother-in-law had thrown at us was short by a few $1,000s when we counted it later. We went to my uncle and aunt about the missing money, but we also told them we're not claiming it, thinking of it as severance money. Afterward, my real mother received a call. It seems my mother-in-law had called our old home. "It's pitiful to be taken in by a daughter-in-law who has done nothing for my son. Since she's back, I'll come and take care of her hospital visits," she said, as if it was only natural. My mother replied, "We didn't ask for a sister-in-law to come, and the married couple are already adults. We have no intention of interfering. I heard that you said you didn't need your youngest son and went to the city to be taken care of by your eldest. Why are you here?" After that, she hung up without a word. 2 years have passed since then. After that, it seems that my uncle, aunt, 2 elder brother-in-law, their wives, and my mother-in-law had a discussion. We had moved after my mother-in-law went to the elder brother's house, so we received a message through my parents' house from my uncle to participate. But John said, "I fulfill my responsibilities as a child. If any money comes in, please offset it by disclaiming my inheritance." So we did not participate. I know about what happened after a while from my aunt. The wives of my brother-in-law said they wanted my mother-in-law to live locally and be taken care of by us, and they wanted us to take care of all her care in old age. In return, their husbands would renounce my mother-in-law's property. It's a really good condition, so the youngest couple should accept it. Not knowing what they were jealous of, they said that since the youngest could only live locally, it was natural for those who remained in the local area to care of their parents, alternating between the 2 of them. By the way, my mother-in-law's property is just a 30-year-old house built on an 80-square-foot plot of land in her pension. Here in the countryside, an 80-square-foot single-family home is on the smaller side. This isn't meant to belittle my mother-in-law's real family, but it is a fact. In fact, my real home, being a part-time farm, has a 200-square-foot plot of land, and my brother is building a house on the property. Even so, the value of the land isn't much. And to think they could lure us in with such a thing, it was a stark reminder of the fundamental difference in thinking between the wives of my brother-in-law and us. In the past, we didn't do it because we could receive the house, but because she was John's mother, we felt obligated to be there for her because we were nearby, and she must have felt lonely being left alone. My mother-in-law must have felt lonely back then. She even thanked us. However, from the persistent demands for premium fruit by the wives of my brother-in-laws, we came to understand all of my mother-in-law's true feelings and nature and grew to loathe everything, thus becoming estranged. Still, it seems that our intentions did not get through to the wives of my brother-in-laws at all. My aunt too has taken care of her mother-in-law when she got married, so she tried explaining to my brother-in-law's wives that it's not how they think it is, and even voiced her opinion to my mother-in-law, but it seems like they just couldn't understand each other. After all, my mother-in-law just wants to live with my successful brother-in-law in the city, as she's always been telling people around her, and she insists that they take her in no matter which one. Despite the continued disagreements that came after, it seems like in the end, they rented an apartment near my eldest brother's house with my mother-in-law's pension and assistance from my brother-in-law. But my brother-in-law's wives have made it clear they won't look after her at all. If anything happens, they plan to rely on caregiver support and admit her into a facility. Now, it seems my mother-in-law frequently calls my aunt saying she's lonely. Through my family, my aunt requested my husband, John, to contact her sister who's not been the brightest but still pitiful. But he refused, saying, There are things that are unforgivable, especially because she's a parent of mine. The third son who could only go to a technical college, who doesn't shine in comparison to his older brothers, who could only marry a high school graduate, who could only get a job in a company that doesn't even air commercials on TV, who wears a polo shirt to work and wears work clothes while his brothers go to work in suits every day. I feel sorry for John, who was told to his face by his mother that she wouldn't be able to boast to society if such a third son and his wife took care of her. I understand how John feels, so I probably won't forgive my mother-in-law in the future. I am proud of John, who works hard every day dripping with sweat, because he is the man I love. The trigger was premium fruits, but I'm really glad that I woke up this time and learned not only about my brother-in-law's wives, but also about my mother-in-law's true character. I've been living in my hometown for a long time. I like it here, and I thought I cherished my mother-in-law. But it seems she didn't feel the same way, and she probably hated being looked after by the poorly performing third son. After moving to a new house, we no longer had to worry about going to the hospital, and we have a bit more free time and money. Our child is also a bit bigger, and we have more time to ourselves, but now we're living happily as a family of 3. Because of my mother-in-law, John had a very sad face for a while, but now he looks much clearer than before. For John, this is his home. We want to continue living happily as a family in this house. Hey Mom, are we going to Grandpa's this year? Summer vacation is just around the corner. My son came over to me and asked with an excited face. Well, your dad can't get time off, so it'll be just you and me. But if that's okay, let's go together. With that, my son raised his hands and cheered happily. My name is Jessica, a working mom of 38 raising a child. I had been job hunting since my son was born, but luckily got rehired at my old workplace around the time he started elementary school, and I've been working mainly from home. My son has grown up, now in the 5th grade. I'm considering the next steps in my work life as well. My husband is 2 years older, at 40. He was an ambitious salesman when we got married, but changed jobs 3 years ago, forgetting the favors he owed his old company, supposedly because of a better offer. For some reason, his salary, which should have been increased, has decreased, and the conditions are worse than at his previous company, with long hours of overtime every day. My parents live in the countryside at a rural farm in Nebraska, and my son has been watching farm work since he was little. Now he joyfully helps out whenever he goes to the countryside. My parents seem very pleased to be able to work in the field with their grandson and are always enthusiastic about teaching him. I used to be a little embarrassed that our home was a farm, but now I'm glad that this is where I grew up, and when I go back to the countryside, I help out in the fields again after a long time. My husband, having grown up in the city, dislikes the countryside, and whenever we go to my parents' place, he arranges work, even if he has to force it, as an excuse not to go. He seems to think I haven't noticed, but it's obvious. I'd like to spend about a week in the countryside this year. What about you? I asked my husband just to check. I'm busy with work. I plan on taking my vacation later in the summer. It's always the same. Well, I guess staying a week at your in-laws can be unpleasant. But my son is looking forward to it, so this year I took my son and went to the countryside for fun. Then I get contacted almost every day by my husband. Where's my change of clothes? What should I eat for dinner? It's always such things. I know my husband is not good at housework, so I prepared his clothes so he doesn't have to do laundry, and I've frozen meals and instant meals so he should be able to eat if he can use the microwave. He's a grown man, so if he doesn't like it, he can eat out or buy something. Despite telling him that, he kept asking me questions. It makes me want to tell him to give me back the precious time I've spent preparing for these unnecessary interruptions. When I get home, there are unwashed laundry, uncollected trash, and everything is in disarray. I can't help but sigh. I tried talking to my husband, but he simply responded, "I was tired from work, can't be helped." Just as I expected. I usually work, take care of our son, and do house chores, yet how is it that he can't do anything, even his personal tasks, in just 1 week? I feel frustrated, but I can't bring myself to start a fight that's clearly on the horizon. A month later, our son, who had just returned from visiting our relatives in the countryside, seemed to have more moments of contemplation. I thought he might just be missing the family he had stayed with. When I asked him why, his answer was surprisingly mature. "Grandpa and Grandma seem to be struggling with their farm work. I wish there was an easier way for them." Apparently, he was concerned about his grandparents. I was touched by his empathy and felt proud of his growth. Later, during a rare visit to the office, I had a casual chat with the boss and mentioned this conversation. My son was worried about his grandparents who work in the fields. My boss seemed intrigued by my comment. Apparently, they were planning to apply our company's technology to agriculture and start a new project. Despite being a small company, we have developed various products. They want to introduce those to agriculture. In other words, to implement IT solutions in farming. They were looking for farms willing to collaborate for a pilot project, so I immediately talked to my parents, agreed to assist, and they decided to participate. Since then, there's been a new spark in my life. The nature of my work has shifted from mundane tasks to creative ones. The prospect of helping my parents and the excitement of coming up with new ideas keeps me exhilarated. I suppose I look just like my son, who's eager to go visit the countryside again. This is the kind of work I've always wanted to do. Seeing me like this, my husband, misinterpreting my enthusiasm, asked me in a bad mood, "Are you having an affair or something?" "Excuse me?" Taken aback by his outrageous question, I let out a surprised squeak. I had to explain the situation to him again. "It's not an affair, I'm just enjoying my work." I've discussed it with my husband, but his response has always been nonchalant, just an uh-huh. This time, however, he surprisingly smirked and dismissively said, "Huh, you're turning into a farmer now, huh?" I was annoyed by his condescending attitude towards farming and rural life, but thinking it's best for our son to have both parents, I've never considered separating from him. But life's turning points can't come out of the blue. A few months later, I ended up leaving my job to start my own venture. I found that there were more things I wanted to do on my own, and after discussions with my company, it was decided that I would go independent but still collaborate with my current company. I had been talking to my husband about it for a while, but when it actually came to leaving my job, a big incident occurred. I approached my husband when he got home from work. "Welcome home. Just like I told you, I quit my job today." I reported to my husband again, just to be sure. Suddenly, he gave me a stern look. "What? You really quit? Why? You're going to be a bum?" Huh? I almost blurted out the same words as my husband. Hadn't I been talking about this all along, and hadn't he been listening? Who's quitting work? "Listen, I've been telling you this for a while. I'm not going to stop working. I'm going independent." Going independent? That's just a fancy excuse, isn't it? Even up to now, you've just been lounging around at home with your laptop open. I can't even tell if you're working or playing. You're just saying you're going independent so you can play on your computer and feel like you're working, right? Did my husband just say something outrageous? I wonder if the reason why working from home is not understood is because there are a certain number of people who think like this. Playing? I am properly working. I prepared to argue back, ready for a fight. I understand why you might feel that way, but I've been working properly, doing housework in between, and I don't think I've ever slacked off on my work, housework, or child rearing, have I? Since you're at home, it's only natural that you do the housework and child rearing. It's your job. I let out a sigh at his words. If that's the case, you should be earning a decent income. Your salary has been lower since you switched jobs, right? Right now, I'm the one earning more. If I were a stay-at-home wife, maybe that would be acceptable, but that's not the case, is it? In fact, I'm contributing more to our household income. But you're quitting, right? So you're a bum. My husband sighed and walked out of the living room. We can't even have a proper conversation, so it doesn't even turn into a fight. I thought things would go back to normal the next day, but then my husband came back and stopped in front of the table. Wondering what was going on, my husband spoke. A wife who doesn't bring in money is useless. Write this down and let's get a divorce. From out of nowhere, my husband laid divorce papers on the table. For a moment, I was confused, but I accepted it out of anger at his actions. Really? Are you sure about this? With that, my husband gave a sly smile. Of course. I'm not obligated to support a housewife who doesn't work. Oh, I see. It's futile to say anything to this man. I can't do anything about it. But we have a son, so divorce isn't that simple. When I brought this up, my husband laughed it off. You take him with you. Raising kids is a mother's job, right? Besides, he doesn't look like me at all. Whose kid is he? I couldn't believe my ears. My husband has gradually stopped playing with our son and now hardly talks to him at all, but I never imagined he would say such a thing. How can you say that? He's your son through and through. You're just saying that because you want child support, right? Feeling insulted, I raised my voice. Well then, go ahead and get a DNA test or whatever, but you do realize what happens if he turns out to be your son, right? Yeah, I'll pay child support or whatever if you can prove it. Our son has been through a lot, but he would be transferring to a new school from the new academic year. We'll live in my parents' house and he'll go to school there. My work can be done anywhere, and actually this environment is more conducive to my research on IT and agriculture. Our son also seems to be enjoying helping out with farm work, and he listens intently, eyes shining whether he understands or not when I talk about my work. Before my son and I moved out, the results of the DNA test came back, affirming the father-son relationship between my husband and our son. If I talk to him based on this, he might reconsider the divorce. It would be better for our son to have both parents. That's what I thought as I was about to talk to my husband, but my son, noticing that something was different about me, said, "It's okay if Dad isn't around." Surprised, I asked my son why. Then, a shocking truth came to light. My son claimed that my husband was having an affair. Apparently, when he was playing with his friends after school, he saw my husband walking arm in arm with a young woman. It seems he's seen it several times. After he came back from my country home, my son seemed deep in thought. Turns out he had witnessed my husband's infidelity, but it seems he didn't want to break the news to me, fearing it would upset me. I can't say my husband hadn't been acting suspiciously. Since he's changed jobs, he's been coming home late and started bringing his cell phone even to the bathroom, but I just assumed it was normal behavior for a busy worker. I never even considered divorce, so I probably didn't entertain the idea that he might be cheating. Is it possible that the idea that he was persistently telling me that I was cheating on him was because he was cheating? When I thought that, I couldn't help but feel ashamed and consulted with my mom friends. To my surprise, she confessed to having seen my husband with a woman who looked like a mistress. Moreover, my friend had instinctively taken a photo of the scene with her phone and was contemplating whether to tell me. If he wanted to cheat, he could have done it somewhere less conspicuous. Probably thinking I'd be homebound because I work from home, my husband surprisingly had been going on local dates. While my husband was in the shower, I pretended to have something to do in the bathroom, checked his phone, and conveniently found messages from the woman he was allegedly seeing, and I saved the evidence. I also found discarded receipts in our room which indicated my husband's whereabouts. Gathering evidence of his infidelity wasn't as difficult as I thought. Through my lawyer, I'm demanding alimony and child support. I didn't think he would pay willingly, so I involved a lawyer. As expected, I received a call from my husband. To my surprise, my husband even showed up at my parents' house, which he despised visiting.
"What is this all about?"
When I answered the doorbell, my husband started shouting. "Isn't it clear? The amount claimed for damages and child support. Oh, and the DNA test results too. You said you would pay child support if paternity was confirmed, right? So make sure you do. Also, you know what this is about, right? Compensation for infidelity." I was beyond anger and found myself laughing. My husband kept denying any infidelity. Of course I no longer bought his words. I snatched the envelope he was holding, took out its contents. "These are the proofs of your infidelity, so that's the claim for damages. You get it, right? You kept saying that I was being unfaithful, but it seems that idea only came up because you were the one cheating. Moreover, the woman you were cheating with isn't from your previous workplace. To make things worse, she's married and her husband is your colleague. You moved jobs not because you were headhunted like you bragged about, but probably because it got uncomfortable after the affair. I never thought you were cheating when you said you had overtime." While sighing, I stated the facts and my husband glared at me.
"This is a setup. Anyone could forge these photos."
His stupidity left me too drained to argue. "Well, you might think it's fabricated, but that is genuine."
"What? Why?"
"Because I'm not so idle as to make fake pictures, and I'm the one who obtained this evidence." I grew frustrated as my husband kept insisting it was fake. "Surely you must be worried about another alimony claim. I guess your current salary isn't as low as you made it out to be. The reason you couldn't contribute to our household expenses was because you were paying off the alimony from your affair, wasn't it? I knew something was off. You were secretly making payments from your salary to the ex-husband of your mistress, weren't you? Well, that sure would drain your money, but don't worry, you'll be paying again this time around." It seemed as though he and his mistress believed they were fated partners who had mistakenly married others. If that were the case, he should have just divorced me, but I guess he didn't want to divorce me because he knew he would have less disposable income. This time, my husband was so adamant because he genuinely thought I had cheated in the past and that our son wasn't his. That it was really his son. Hadn't his wife been having an affair? That was what the mistress had manipulated him into believing. Considering he could doubt me based on such claims, it's definitely the right decision to get a divorce. Anyway, we're getting divorced. We're already living separately, so there shouldn't be any issues. My husband's expression hardened at my words, but I just laughed it off. "Oh, I suppose there might be one issue. You're probably having a tough time maintaining the house, aren't you? You can't even use the washing machine or take out the trash. But you'll be evicted if you let it become a dump, so you better clean up. I have no desire to return to such a place. I won't be returning to that house. Do your best with your mistress. Oh, and I want the alimony and child support in one lump sum. I don't want to deal with unpaid installments. Even if you have to get into debt, you should pay it off first. Thank you."
"Hey, wait."
Despite the desperate look on his face and the cries in the hallway, when he realized no one was paying him any attention, he dejectedly walked out, got into his car, and drove off. Apparently, he was surprisingly upset by the fact that it was proven that our son was indeed his. I guess he lost faith in his mistress, who kept insisting that they weren't related. The divorce with my husband was finalized smoothly after that. As promised, I received the alimony and child support in one lump sum. He couldn't afford it even after dipping into his savings, so he dutifully took out a loan. When I made a claim for damages against the mistress, a huge argument broke out between her and my ex-husband. She was outraged, yelling, "Why should I pay damages?" But it's only natural since she was the one who had an affair with a married man. They had to leave the apartment we lived in because they couldn't afford the rent. They've now moved to a rundown apartment, and the mistress seems unhappy about it, but they have nowhere else to go, so they're reluctantly living together. Meanwhile, I'm fully back on track with my work, and I'm enjoying every day. When I got a job related to IT, I never thought I would have a future like this, but it's like a dream that what I've studied is helping my family's agriculture. With the adoption of IT, the hours of work in the field have been reduced, and my parents are glad to say that it has lessened their physical burden significantly. My son has started middle school, and I was worried whether he'd fit in, but he's off to school today, bright and cheery. He still loves spending time in the fields, but he's also shown an interest in my work, and recently, he started asking me to teach him how to use the computer. I know it might seem like I'm a doting parent, but I can't help but look forward to the future.